Picture in your head your favorite memory. It could be winning the championship, acing your finals, maybe your wedding. Now, picture that memory, but with a camera, taking photos for yourself. Imagine being at that event and taking as many photos as you can, cementing that moment forever. Can you do that? Can you ruin that moment for yourself by putting yourself behind the viewfinder? Because imagine if you were at your wedding, reciting your vows at the altar, with a camera in front of your face. That's something you might see happening on a TV show. It's comedy. I think most of us here have used a camera at some point in our lives, whether it be a DSLR or just our phones. But I don't think any of us, or at least most of us here, have used the most ancient form of photography, a film camera. If you were anything like me, or at least me until last summer, then the only exposure you would have to film photography would be from shows like Stranger Things, where characters like Jonathan Byers exposed film negatives in the dark room. Yet, there's so much more to film photography that you don't see, the intangibles you can't measure. A film camera is an analog machine, no electricity required that you insert film negatives into. The shutter will flip open for just a fraction of a second, and later on you'll go to the dark room to develop those exposed negatives and print them onto photo paper. So you may hear that and think, well, that's a lot of work to go to for just a couple photos. And you're right, it is. But for a century, that's how photography operated. The evolution of the camera from its humble beginnings of the Kodak to the now mirrorless digital machines are analogous to how we portray ourselves and the world around us. We have gone from immortalizing key moments in history and creating a mythos around them to rendering many moments generic and common. That's not to say every moment is generic and common. That's never going to be true. Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, these are all wonderful tools to share moments of our lives that are special and valuable to us, to people that we care about. But in order to make every photo special and valuable, it's better if we figure out which photos we really want to take. The goal is not to take photos, but to know which photos to take and to make those matter. A great photographer knows how to bring the camera up, but a better photographer will know when to put the camera down. It was over the summer when I was first introduced to the concept of film photography with my dad's old Canon FTb. It was tucked away in a small humidity closet, just next to my parents' bed, a dusty analog machine, lens cap taped on, a film roll lay cold inside, waiting to be exposed to the light. The last time a teenager had used this was 30 years ago, when my father was given his first camera, and now it had found its way down to me. I wanted to take this seriously. This was a part of my father's legacy. I gave myself a week to use this camera, a week to learn the ins and outs of this 50-year-old machine, even older than my dad. I knew that I wouldn't be able to see photos right after I took them, and I knew that anything that came onto photo paper would be from me, with no help from the camera. Day 1, hour 0. With nothing better to do, I decided to go around my condo and around the area, take photos of what I saw. I was a photographer in his natural environment, behind the viewfinder. Little statues, chess pieces, even cars. I snapped them all. Day 1, hour 10. As it's been drilled into our heads here at SAS, reflection is an integral part of any process. All I could reflect on was the amount of photos I had taken. Film rolls typically have 36 photos, and day 1 had consumed 10 of those photos. 10 photos. That number had been so insignificant until I used a film camera. I had a trigger finger. Probably most of you do too. You just don't realize it because there's no limit to what you can take. After day 1, my psychology on photography was no longer able to create the kind of art I was after. I was too used to taking as many photos as I can to get the perfect shot, and I'm sure many of you do as well, but I had to change that. It just doesn't work with film photography. I realized I had to change the way I took photos. I had to think more carefully now because there's a risk factor involved now. What if everyone had this problem? What if our phones could only hold 36 photos at a time and not thousands? Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential photos of all time has over 75% of those photos being taken on a film camera. Now, correlation doesn't mean causation, but what this does show you is that never seeing what you took right after you took it and limiting your storage space never stopped quality photos, photos that meant something, from rising to the top. With film cameras, you would see the quality of photography around you on the internet spike upwards, as people would be forced to take the best photos they can, and not just any photo they can. With this extreme limitation, only the best of the best of the best would make it to the surface. And the same would have to happen with me if I was going to be successful in this new venture. I set off on day 2 to correct the mistakes I made. To average out the rest of the week for the horrible first day, I would have to take, on average, 4 photos a day. I didn't think I could do it. 4 photos a day, that's so minuscule. But what I later realized was what that meant was 4 good photos a day, 4 photos I'll use. And when I say use, I mean post to my wall or on Instagram. Not Visco, though. Haven't broken into that scene yet. In my life, I've taken thousands of photos with my DSLR, but I've only taken 40 that I consider to be my A-list. So, in a sense, film photography was forcing me to cut to the best photos immediately, forcing me to be better than I was before. If I was going to take a photo, I was going to use it. I had 6 days. I went to arcades, around Orchard, even Dintai, taking photos when I felt like I needed to. Not when I wanted to, but when I needed to. I was at Time Zone with my friends on day 4. We were waiting for a movie, and we saw this one guy at an arcade machine where if you could stop a moving shape into a slot perfectly, you'd win an iPhone X. And it's a scam because it's nearly impossible. And this guy blew $50 trying to win a new iPhone. See, when I play that game, I only blow $10 because obviously that's a financially responsible choice. Jokes aside, I took a picture of that moment right before the shape moved into the slot. And I think it's one of the most powerful moments one can capture because here was this guy for the last 20 minutes trying to win a new iPhone. And here was his chance. Yet, he didn't get it. That was the only photo I took that day. And after that moment at the arcade, I realized what had now changed. I was hyper-aware of everything around me, even when I didn't have a camera on me. Artistic elements like symmetry and the rule of thirds stood out to me more, and even more metaphysical elements like the way I felt. Powerful moments stood out. In a way, I truly felt enlightened. The mindset of taking fewer photos had forced me to be cognizant of my surroundings and the world around me. One could say I was living in the moment, and as cliche as that sounds, it was true. Before, if I saw something unique or beautiful or amazing, I'd take a photo, and those are fair standards. But with a film camera, you take those standards and you raise them to the max. And suddenly, you realize which photos you really want to take and which photos you were just going to take, but with no real weight behind them. The contrast between amazing and average moments increased as the gray area between them decreased, an unintentional result of my quest to become a better photographer. And when I put the camera down, that mindset didn't just go away. It just didn't have the priority of taking good photos anymore. Now, as a photographer, my priority was no longer on taking photos, but on enjoying the day and taking the photos that were calling to be taken. And since they called, they would be good photos. But there's still the problem of photography itself. Photography is a paradox. You want to capture once-in-a-lifetime moments, but you also want to experience those once-in-a-lifetime moments for yourself too. For those of you who don't know, filming a sports game isn't enjoyable. Well, it is for me because I love filmmaking. It's not enjoyable in the sense that you don't get to enjoy watching the game. You're too busy following the ball. The switcher is calling you on your walkie-talkie, telling you to zoom in less and keep the shot wide. Your camera's flicking in and out of the live stream. You don't know what's wrong. You just forget to enjoy the game. This is where one has to differentiate between professional photography and photography as a hobby. Professional photographers have a job to do, and that's to take photos. They can use my mindset, but like any other job in the world, if they don't do it right, they're fired. In a sense, the factor of risk, the factor of missing a moment is so large they cannot ignore it. People who capture moments for a living capture as many as they can to prevent the risk from missing out on capturing any of them. Risk is what separates these photographers and all of us. And to add on to that, if you're a hired photographer, you're not there to enjoy the moment anyways. I took photos at prom last year as a freshman, and I wasn't there to enjoy prom and party. I was there so people wouldn't have to worry about capturing moments because I was there capturing moments for them. It's only when you're taking the photos and the only person missing out on the moment is you, is when my mindset comes into play. You can't have your moment and capture it too. So that decision making, whether you want to take the photo or live in the moment, that choice is up to you. Day 7, final day. I'd used up all 36 shots in the roll, but whether or not those shots were any good was still a question left hanging in the air. Taking the roll to the developer in Chinatown, thoughts raced through my head. What if the photos I'd taken weren't any good? What if the whole week had been a waste? Needless to say, I was nerve-wracked. Fast forward to the afternoon. Burned onto a CD were the images my camera had made. Inserting the disk into the drive, I awaited the results. My eyes were half open. I really didn't want to see this. Wow, I really didn't want to see this. I'd underestimated how hard film photography would be. But I don't think taking good photos is what the last 10 minutes have been about. It's about knowing when to take good photos. Even if the photo doesn't follow artistic elements and artistic rules, as long as it means something to you, then I think you're doing the job right. Because that's the job, taking photos that mean something. And look, I'm not the best photographer I know. These are terrible photos. I still have lots to learn. What I learned over the summer with my film camera was knowing how to choose better moments to take photos of. A good photographer knows when to bring the camera up. A great photographer knows when to put the camera down. All it took for me to realize how to be a better photographer was to limit myself and cut down the unnecessary. And to do that, I only needed 1 week with a film camera. And to add on to that, I learned how to notice the artistry around me, something that was now possible because I now had time to just observe without the pressure of taking a good photo. That was a nice benefit. Maybe put a limit on yourself and on your photography and see where it takes you. The world is yours to capture. Thank you.